The Tiger of Mysore by G.A. Henty. Chapter 19. Found at Last. The next morning early, Dick and Surajah set to work to perfect their disguises. They had before appeared simply as two young traders, well-to-do and of a class above the ordinary peddling merchant. They now fitted on the ample beards that had been made at Tripatli. These were attached so firmly to their faces by an adhesive wax that they could not be pulled off without the use of a good deal of force. With the same stuff, small patches of hair were fastened on, as to hide the edge of the foundation of the beard. Tufts of short grey hair were attached to their eyebrows. A few grey lines were carefully drawn at the corner of the eyes and across the foreheads, and when this was done, they felt assured that no one was likely to suspect the disguise. Ibrahim, who had assisted in the operation, declared that he should take them for men of 65, and as, before beginning it, both of them had darkened their faces several shades, they felt confident that no one at the fort was likely to recognize them. When Surajah had put on the padded undergarment, and converted himself into a portly-looking old man, and Dick put on the great horn spectacles, they indulged in a burst of laughter at their changed appearance, while Ibrahim fairly shouted with amusement. He was to stay behind in the woods when they went on, for it would but have added to the risk had he accompanied them, as unless also completely disguised he would have been recognized by the soldiers with whom he had talked during his 24-hour stay inside the tower walls. He was in the evening to proceed along the road to encamp in the last grove he came to, at a distance of a quarter of a mile from the gates, and to remain there until they returned. Under his garments Dick had wound a thin but very strong silken cord that he had purchased at Bangalore. It was 400 feet in length, and considerably increased his apparent bulk, although he was still far from emulating the stoutness of Surajah. The halters of the pack horses were attached to the cruppers of the riding ponies, and after a final instruction to Ibrahim that if at the end of 4 days they had not returned, he was to endeavour to find out what had happened to them, and was then to carry the news to Tripatli, they started for the fort. When they approached the gate, they were, as before, hailed by the sentry. "We are merchants," Surajah said, "and we have with us a rich assortment of goods of all descriptions, silks and trinkets for the ladies of the governor's harem, and handkerchiefs, scarves, silk ornaments, silver ornaments, and things of all kinds suitable for the wives of those of lower rank. We pray for permission to enter and exhibit our wares, which have been collected by us in the cities where they were manufactured, and which we can therefore sell at prices hitherto unheard of." "I will send word up to the governor," the officer said. "It is a long time since we have been visited by traders, and maybe he will grant you permission. You had best go back to the shade of those trees. It will be a good hour before the answer comes." "I think it likely they will let us in," Dick said, as they moved away towards the trees. "It is but a short time since things were sufficiently settled for traders to venture up here, and as Savandroog lies altogether off the roads between large towns, it is possible that none with such goods as we have come this way, since the garrison took over Savandroog from the British detachment that occupied it." In a little over an hour there was a shout from the walls, and on approaching the gate again, they were told that the governor had given permission for them to enter. "You are to be blindfolded," the officer said, as the gate closed behind them. "No one may ascend the rock unless he consents to this. Your horses will be led, and beware that you do not attempt to remove the bandages until you have permission to do so." It took nearly an hour to mount the steep road, and when they came to a standstill, and the sub-officer who had accompanied them told them that they could now remove their bandages, they found themselves in front of a small building close to the commander's quarters. The packs were, by the order of the officer, taken off the horses by the soldiers who had led them up, and carried into the house. The horses were fastened in the shade to rings in the wall, and on Surajah pointing out the packs containing goods he wished to show to the ladies, 2 of the soldiers carried them across to the governor's house. The old officer himself came to the door. "Enter, my friends," he said. "You are the first traders who have come up here since we took over the fort some 6 months ago, and methinks you will do a brisk business if your wares are, as you sent up to say, good and cheap." The bales were taken into a room, the soldiers retired, and in a minute the commander's wife, accompanied by 3 or 4 other ladies, entered. Dick and Surajah, after salaaming profoundly to the veiled figures, at once began to unpack their bales. The assortment had been very judiciously made, and, to women who had, for more than 6 months, been deprived of the pleasure of shopping, the display was irresistible. In their desire to examine the goods, the ladies speedily lifted their veils, and, seating themselves on cushions they had brought in with them, chattered unrestrainedly, examining the quality of the silks which Surajah and Dick, squatting behind their wares, handed for their inspection, comparing the colours, asking each other's advice, and endeavouring to beat down the terms Surajah named. In the first place, he asked the price marked on small labels attached to each article, but suffered himself, after the proper amount of reluctance and protests that he should be a ruined man, to abate his terms considerably, although the ladies were evidently well satisfied that the goods were indeed bargains. It was a long time before the ladies could make up their minds which to choose among the many silks exhibited for their selections. When this had been settled, the pack containing delicate muslins was opened, and the same scene gone through then. It was altogether 4 hours before the purchases were all made, and even then the boxes of trinkets remained unopened, the Governor's wife saying, "No, we will not look at them. We have ruined ourselves already. Tomorrow, when our husbands know how much we have spent, you can show the trinkets to them, and try your best to get them to buy. These things we have been getting are our own affair. It is for them to make us presents of ornaments, if they are disposed to. This evening you must come in again. The ladies from the other fort will be here then." The purchases made were paid for, the bales again fastened up, and carried across to their room. The Governor met them as they went out. "I suppose you have been ruining us all," he said good humouredly. "Well, it is a dull life up here, and the ladies have but few chances of spending money." "We are to see the ladies from the other fort this evening, my lord. Have we your permission, in the meantime, to go and sell in the soldiers' quarters? We have goods suited to the needs of their wives also, as well as those for the ladies." "Certainly, you can go about as you please up here. It is only as to the approaches that we have to be careful. But wait in your room for a short time. I will have food sent over to you." In a few minutes a servant brought across a large dish of pilau, and several cakes of sweetmeats, the latter being, he informed them, the special gift of the Governor's wife. There was no occasion for them to start, as they had intended after their meal, for the news of their coming had spread, and by the time they had finished, a number of women were waiting outside. Until sunset they were busily engaged in selling their goods, for the most part bright cotton cloths, red silk handkerchiefs, and cheap silver trinkets. Soldiers sauntered in and out. For these they had provided a store of pipes, tobacco, tobacco boxes, knives, and muslins for turbans, and as the news spread that these were to be obtained, the number of soldiers increased, until the room was quite crowded with them, as well as by many natives engaged in the work of rebuilding the fortifications. Surajah did the selling, while Dick's part of the work was receiving the money and giving change. As he was stooping over a tray in front of him, piled with copper, picking up the change for silver coin, he heard a man ask Surajah for a pound of his best tobacco and a pipe. There was something in the accent that caused him to look up sharply. As he did so, he started. The blood rushed to his head so violently that a mist seemed to pass across his eyes, and his hand shook so that he dropped the coins he was counting. Forgetful of the dark stain on his face, he bent forward over the tray again, to conceal his emotion, forced himself to pick out the right change, and then, handing it to its owner, again looked up. The man who was standing before Surajah was broader and taller than those around him. The sun had darkened his face until its shade approached those of his companions, and yet there was no mistaking the fact that he was a European. A heavy moustache and beard, streaked with grey, concealed the lower part of his face. Dick dared not gaze on the man too earnestly, and could see no likeness to the picture on the wall at Shadwell, but, allowing for the effects of hardship and suffering, he judged him to be about the age of his father. The man was evidently on good terms with the soldiers, one or two of whom were chaffing him on his purchase. "Will nothing but the best tobacco satisfy you?" one laughed. "Nothing, and even that won't really satisfy me. This stuff's good enough when rolled up for cigars, and does well enough in hookahs, but I'd give all this pound for a couple of pipes of pigtail, which is the tobacco we smoked at sea." Again Dick's heart beat rapidly. This man must have been a sailor. He could not restrain himself from speaking. "Have you been a sailor, then?" he asked. "Aye, I was a sailor, though it was many years ago now since I saw the sea." "We got some English tobacco at Madras," Dick said, not hesitating for once at telling an untruth. "We sold most of it to the Feringhi soldiers on our way up, but I think I have got a little of it still left somewhere in the pack. I am too busy to look for it now, and we shall soon be going to show our goods to the officers' wives, but if you can come here at 9 o'clock, I may have looked it out for you." "I can't come at 9," the man said, "for at 8:30 I am shut up for the night." "Come at 8, then," Dick said. "If I am not back, come the first thing in the morning, before we get busy." "I will come, sure enough," the man said. "I'd walk 100 miles, if it would let me, for half a pound of pigtail." "Get rid of them, Surajah," Dick whispered, as the man shouldered his way through the crowd. "Make some excuse to send them off." "Now, my friend," Surajah said, "you see it is getting dusk. It will soon be too dark to see what you are buying, and we have been selling for 8 hours, and need rest. At 8 o'clock tomorrow we will open our packs again, and everyone shall be served. But I pray you excuse us going on any longer now. As you see, we are not as young as we once were, and we are both sorely weary." As time was no object, and the work of purchasing would relieve the tedium of the following day, the crowd good humouredly dispersed. Surajah rose and closed the door after the last of them, and then turned to Dick. He had himself been too busily engaged in satisfying the demands of the customers to look up, and had not noticed that one of them was a white man. "What is it?" he asked, as he looked around. "Has the heat upset you?" Then, as his eye fell on Dick, his voice changed, and he hurried towards him, exclaiming anxiously, "What is it, Dick? What has happened?" For Dick was leaning against a bale by the side of him, and had hidden his face in his arms. Surajah saw that his whole frame was shaking with emotion. "My dear lord," Surajah said, as he knelt beside him and laid his arm across his shoulder, "you frighten me. Has aught gone wrong? Are you ill?" Dick slightly shook his head, and lifting one of his hands, made a sign to Surajah that he could not at present speak. A minute or two later he raised his head. "Did you not see him, Surajah?" "See who, Dick?" "The white man you last served." "I did not notice any white man." "It was the one you gave a pound of the best tobacco to. Did you not hear me speak to him afterwards?" "No. I was so busy, and so fearfully hot with this padded thing, it was as much as I could do to attend to what they said to me. A white man, did you say? Oh, Dick!" As the idea struck him, he rose to his feet in his excitement. Do you really think he can be your father?" "I do think so, Surajah. Of course, I did not recognize his face. 9 years must have changed him greatly, and he has a long beard. But he is about the right age, and I should say about the same figure, and he has certainly been a sailor, for he said to one of the soldiers that he would give that pound of tobacco for a couple of pipes of pigtail, which is the tobacco sailors smoke. I told him that perhaps I might be able to find him some in my packs, and asked him to come here at 8 o'clock this evening. If I was not in, then he was to come the first thing tomorrow morning, but of course I shall be in at 8. You must make some excuse to the ladies. Say that there are some goods you wish to show them in one of the other packs, and ask me to go and look for it." "Oh, Dick, only to think that, after all our searching, we seem to have come on him at last. It's almost too good to be true." Great as was Surajah's confidence in Dick, he had never quite shared his faith that he would find his father alive, and his non-success while with the army, and since, had completely extinguished any hope he had entertained. His surprise, therefore, equalled his delight at finding that, after all, it seemed probable that their search was likely to be crowned with success. "Of course we will manage it. I will put aside the narrow Benares cloth of gold work for trimmings, and you can be as long as you like looking for it. They will be too busy examining the other things to give it a thought, after you have gone out." "I can be back at 8:30, Dick said, for the man told me he was locked up at that hour. If it had not been for that, I should have arranged for him to come a little later, but of course I shall have opportunities for talking to him tomorrow. There is someone at the door." Surajah opened it, and a soldier entered with their evening meal, and a request that they go across to the governor's as soon as they have finished it, as the ladies had already assembled there. They hurried through their food, and then went across. There was quite a large gathering, for not only had the wives of the officers in the other fort come over, but all those who had been there in the morning were again present, several of them prepared to make further purchases. Trade was as actively carried on as it had been before. When he judged it to be nearly 8 o'clock, Dick nudged Surajah, who said, a minute afterwards, "Oh, we have forgotten the Benares cloth of gold. I am sure that will please the ladies for waistbands or for trimmings. It must have got into the other bales by mistake." "I will go and fetch it," Dick said, and, rising, left the room. A figure was standing at the door when he reached the house. "I was afraid you had forgotten me," the man said. "It is not quite 8 o'clock yet, but as I found that you were both out, I began to be afraid that you might be detained until after I had to go, and you don't know how I long for a pipe of that tobacco. The very thought of it seems to bring old days back again." By this time they had entered the house, and Dick shut the door behind him. He had left a light burning when they went out. Dick was so agitated that he felt unable to speak, but gazed earnestly in the man's face. "What is it, old chap?" the latter said, surprised at the close scrutiny. "Is anything wrong with you?" Dick took off his spectacles rather to gain time than to see more clearly, for a plain glass had been substituted for the lenses. I wanted to ask you a question. Is your name Holland?" The man started. "My name is Jack Holland," he said, "sure enough, though how you come to know it beats me altogether, for I am always called Jack, and, except the governor, I don't think there's a man here knows my other name." "You were captain of the Hooghley, wrecked on the Malabar coast 9 years ago," Dick said, this time speaking in English. After an exclamation of startled surprise, the man stared at him in astonishment too great for words. "Are you English?" he said slowly at first. "Yes, I was in command of the Hooghley. Who in God's name are you?" Dick took his 2 hands. "Father," he said, "I am your son, Dick." The sailor gazed at him with a stupefied air. "Are you mad, or am I?" he said hoarsely. "Neither of us, Father. I am disguised as an old man, but really I am little more than 18. I have been searching for you for more than 2 years, and thank God I have found you at last." And bursting into tears, Dick would have thrown his arms around his father's neck, but the latter pushed him off with one hand and held him at arm's distance, while his other hand plucked at his own throat as if to loosen something that was choking him. It can't be true," he muttered to himself. I'm dreaming this. I shall wake presently, and you will be gone." "It is quite true, Father. Mother is down at Tripataly, waiting for me to bring you to her." With a hoarse cry, the sailor reeled and would have fallen had not Dick caught him and allowed him to sink gradually to the ground, where he lay half supported by one of the bales. Dick ran to one of the saddlebags, where he carried a flask of brandy in case of emergencies, poured some into a cup, and held it to his father's lips. The sailor gasped. "It is brandy," he said suddenly. "I can't have dreamt that." Then he broke into a violent sobbing. Dick knelt by his side and took his hand. "It is assuredly no dream, Father," he said gently. "I am really your son, Dick. I am here with a trusty friend, and now we have found you, you may be sure that we will in some way manage your escape. There is no time now to tell you all that has happened. That I can do afterwards. All that is important for you to know is that Mother is quite well. She has never given up hope, and has always insisted that you were alive, for she said that she should surely have known if you had died. So she taught me her language until I could speak like a native, and 2 years and a half ago she came out here with me. I accompanied the army with my uncle's troop, and searched every hill fort they took for you. Since they went back I have been up in Mysore with my friend Surajah, and thank God at last we have found you." "Thank God indeed, my boy. I do thank Him, not only that you have found me, but that your mother, whom I had never hoped to see again, is alive and well, and also that He has given me so good a son. And now, Father, about your escape. In the first place, have you given your parole not to try to get away?" Captain Holland was himself now. "No, lad, no. At the fort, where I was for 6 years, there was no possibility of escape, and as I was a long time before I began to speak the language, even if I had got away I could never have made my way through the country. Then the governor, it was the same we have here, took me with him to Krishnagiri. I was the only white captive who went there with him. At Krishnagiri there were 5 or 6 others, but when Tippoo heard that an English army was coming up the Ghauts, an order came that they were to be killed. But the governor is a kind-hearted old fellow, and as I had become almost a chum of his, he chose to consider that the order did not apply to me, but only to those he had found at Krishnagiri, for I fancy my existence had been forgotten altogether. I had great hopes that the British would take the place. I think that is the only time I have hoped since I was made prisoner, but the old man is a good soldier, and beat them off. When peace was made, Krishnagiri was, as you know, given up. and the governor was ordered to evacuate the place and to come here. He brought me with him, making me dye my face before I started, so that in my native dress it would not be noticed, in any town we passed through, that I was a white. For had this been done, the news might have come to Tippoo's ears, and there would have been an end of me. Except that I am locked up at night, I am not treated as a prisoner, but the governor, who has a strong sense of duty, has a certain watch kept over me. He has a real friendship for me, and would do all in his power to save my life, short of disobedience to an actual order. But his view is that I have been confided to his care, and that if at any moment the Sultan should write to demand me of him, he would be bound to produce me. "Well, Father, it must be nearly 8:30. I will go with you, and see where you are confined. That's the first step. We will both, tonight, think over the best way to attempt your escape, and in the morning, when your guard is removed, if you will come straight here, we will talk it over. I am afraid you will have to wait for your pigtail till we get to Madras." Captain Holland laughed. "I can afford to wait for that, now. God bless you, my boy. I have never looked for such happiness as this again. But, as you say, it is time for me to be off. I have never been late yet, and if it were reported to the governor that I was so tonight, he might think that there is something in the wind." Dick walked with his father across the fort. "That is the house, in the corner," the captain said, pointing to one before which a group of soldiers were standing. "Don't come any further." Dick stood looking after him, and heard a voice say, "You are late, Jack. I was beginning to wonder what had become of you." "I don't think it is past the hour, yet," Captain Holland replied. "I have been with those traders. They told me this afternoon they might be able to find me some English tobacco in their pack, but they have been too busy to look for it. I hope they will light on it tomorrow. If they do, I will give you half a pipeful. I won't give you more, for it is strong enough to blow your head off after this tasteless stuff you smoke here." Then Dick hurried off to the house, snatching up the stuff he was supposed to be looking for, and joined Surajah at the governor's. It was another hour before the ladies had completed their purchases. Dick, on entering, had given a little nod to Surajah to let him know that it was really his father whom he discovered, and had then tried to keep his attention upon his work as a salesman, and Surajah, as he handed him the goods, had given him a furtive squeeze to his hand in token of his sympathy. "So it really is your father?" he said, as, carrying their greatly diminished pack, they walked across to their house. "It is indeed. You imagine his surprise and joy when I told him who I was. Now we have got to talk over the best plan of getting him out." When the door was shut, and they had seated themselves on two of the bales, Dick first repeated all that his father had told him, and then for a long time they discussed the best plan of attempting an escape. Both agreed at once that it would be next to impossible to get him down the road and out of the gate. In the first place, they would have to leave by daylight, and even could a disguise be contrived that would deceive the sentries and guard at the gate, all of whom were well acquainted with Captain Holland's figure and appearance, it was certain that, as but two had come up the rock, a third would not be allowed to leave, unless he had a special order from the governor. They agreed, therefore, that the escape must be made over the precipice. That this was a matter of great difficulty was evident from the fact that the captain had made no attempt to get away in that manner. Still, there was hope that, with the assistance of the silk rope Dick had brought with him, it might be managed. There was, too, the initial difficulty of getting out from the fort to be faced. "We can do nothing till we have had a long talk with my father," said Dick. "I have no doubt that he has thought all these things over, and has, long before this, made up his mind as to the point at which a descent would be easiest. As at present we know little, except by the casual examination we made last time, we can decide on nothing by ourselves." "I hope it won't be a long way to let oneself down," Surajah said, "for I am quite sure I could not hold on by that thin rope for any distance." "Nor could I, Surajah, if I had to trust only to my hands. My father, as a sailor, will be able to put us up to the best way to do it. But, at any rate, he might let you down first, and I think that by twisting the rope 2 or 3 times round my body, and then holding it between my knees and feet, I might manage, but I dare say my father will hit on some better plan than that. And now we will lie down. I am so stiff that I can hardly stand, from squatting for so many hours behind these things of ours. I thought that I had got pretty well accustomed to it, but I never calculated on having to do it from 10 in the morning until 10 at night, with only 2 half hours off." Dick, however, had little sleep that night. He was too excited over the glorious success he had obtained to be capable of closing an eye, and it was not until day was breaking that he fell into a doze. An hour later he started to his feet at a knock at the door. He was wide awake in a moment, and on running to it his father entered. "You look older today than you did yesterday," the latter said, as he held his hand and gazed into Dick's face. "I fancy that neither of us has had any sleep to speak of. As for myself, I have not closed an eye." "Nor did I, Father, until day began to break. Now, please, let us talk over our plan to escape first, for we may be interrupted at any moment." "Right you are, lad. Does your friend here speak English? For I have never got to be a good hand at their lingo. I want to thank him, too, but, as you say, time is precious, and we must postpone that." "He understands it, Father, and can talk it pretty fairly. We have been constantly together for nearly 2 years. Now, in the first place, is there any place where we can get down from the top here with the aid of a rope?" "It would be a pretty tough job, anyhow, but at the farthest end of the rock is a place where it goes sharp down as if cut with a knife. That would be the best place to try. I take it to be about 200 feet deep. Beyond, the ground seems to slope regularly away. If I could have got a rope, I should have tried it. But they are pretty scarce commodities up here. In fact, I have never seen a piece 20 feet long since we came. What sort of rope have you got?" Dick opened the front of his garment and showed the rope round his body. Captain Holland gave a low whistle of dismay. "I should not like to trust a child with that thing, Dick, much less a grown man. It's no thicker than a flag halyard." "It's thin, Father, but there is no fear as to its strength. I tested every yard of it, and found it would bear 600 weight." "Well, that's ample. But how is one to hold on to a cord like that?" "That's just what we want you to tell us, Father. There must be some way of managing it, if one could but hit upon it." "Yes, that is so, lad," the sailor said thoughtfully. "I'll think it over. Anyhow, I think I could lower you both down, and by knotting it, I might get hold enough to come down after you, but even the knots would be precious small." "One might get over that, Father, by fastening a short stick across every 5 or 6 feet, or every 2 or 3 feet, if you like." "Good, Dick. That would prevent one's coming down with a run, certainly, and by keeping it between one's legs one could always get a rest. Yes, that will do, lad, if I can think of nothing better. There are lots of spears stowed away in the room adjoining mine. If we were to cut them up into 6-inch lengths, with one of a foot long to each 10 for sitting on, that would be just the thing." "That is capital, Father. I had a lot of practice in rope climbing before I came out, and I am sure that I could manage with the help that would give. I don't think Surajah could, but we could let him down first easily. Now, as to your prison." "There are bars to the windows," the captain said, "and a sentry is always on duty outside. The only way would be to escape at the rear. I have often thought it over, but it was of no use breaking out there if I couldn't get any farther. The wall is built of loose stone, without mortar. You see, it would have been a big job to bring up either mortar or bricks from down below, so most of the buildings are entirely of stone. The wall is 2 feet thick, but there would be no great difficulty in getting out the stones, and making a hole big enough to crawl through. I could not do it in my room, because they always look round to see that everything is safe before they lock me up, and it would take so long to do it noiselessly that half the night would be wasted before I could get out. But the magazine, where the spears are kept, communicates with my room, and I could slip in there in the daytime when no one was looking, get behind the spears, which are piled against the wall, and work hidden by them. No one would be likely to go into my room during the day, and if he did, he would not expect to find me there, as I am generally about the place. In that way I could get out enough stones to render it an easy job to finish it after I was locked up. A spearhead is as good a thing to help me prize them out as one could wish for." "Very well, Father. Then we had better settle that you shall get out in that way. Now, shall we go round on the outside and help you?" "No, I don't say but that your help would make it easier to get the stones out without making a noise. Still, your going round might be noticed." "Well then, Father, shall we seize and gag the sentry? We have done such a thing before successfully." "No, that wouldn't do, Dick. The guardhouse is hard by, and the slightest noise would destroy us all. Besides, as they have not many sentries posted up here, they relieve guard every hour, so that the thing would be discovered in no time. No, when I get out, I will creep along noiselessly by the wall. There are houses in the yard almost all along, and though the sentry would not be likely to see me, in the shade of the wall, I'll take care to cross the open spaces when his back is turned. I will then come straight here for you, and we will make for the wall behind the governor's house. There is no sentry on that side, for that steep ravine covers it from attack there. However, there are 6 or 8 feet of level ground between the foot of the wall and the edge of the ravine. The walls are 20 feet in height. With 50 feet of that rope I will make a ladder, and will get hold of a piece of iron to make a grapnel of. How much time can you give me?" "Oh, I should think we could stay here today and tomorrow without seeming to be dawdling without reason." "Do you think you could get ready by tomorrow night, Father?" "Yes, but that will give me plenty of time. Let me see. There is the short ladder to make. That won't take me over an hour. There are 100 bits to cut for the long ladder, putting them about 2 feet apart. That will be a longish job, for the spear shafts are of very tough wood. However, I have a saw and some oil, which will prevent it making a noise, and can make fairly quick work of it. I have several tools, too. I very often do carpentering jobs of all sorts. That's what first made the Governor take to me. I can get all that part of the work done today. Tonight I'll do the knotting. Of course, I shall make it a goodish bit over 200 feet long, for it may turn out that I have not judged the depth right, and that the cliff is higher than I thought it was. I don't think sawing up the spear shafts will take more than an hour or two, so I shall be able to show myself about the place as usual. I'll go over and take a good look at the rock again, and stick a spearhead into the ground, at the point where it seems to me that it goes down straightest, and where there is the least chance of the rope getting rubbed against a sharp edge. I shan't begin at the wall until tomorrow, for I don't suppose I shall be able to get out the first few stones without making a bit of noise, and it would not do to work at night. Now, lad, I think we can consider that as all settled, and I won't come near you again, unless there's some change of plan. I shall be here tomorrow evening. I hope it will be by 10 o'clock. That must depend upon how long it takes me to get down the outside layer of stone. If you should hear a sudden row, make at once for the wall behind the Governor's house, and wait there for me to join you. You see, some of the stones may come down with a run, and if they do, I shall give the rest a shove and be out like a shot. I shall hear which side the sentry is running round the house, and shall belt the other way. Of course, he'll see the stones and give the alarm, but in the darkness I have not much doubt of being able to slip away, and I will then make my way straight to the wall. Of course, I shall have the ladders tied up in bundles, and shall take care not to leave them behind me." "All right, Father. We'll be ready tomorrow evening. We shall wait quietly for you until you come, unless we hear a sudden alarm. If we do, we'll go round behind the Governor's house, and wait there for your coming." "That's it, my lad. Now I'll be going. I am certainly glad that no one has come in while I have been here." Chapter 20: The Escape. Soon after 8 o'clock customers began to drop in, and throughout the day a brisk trade was carried on. Surajah was sent for in the course of the morning by the Governor, who bought several silver bracelets, brooches, and earrings for his wife. Most of the other officers came in during the day and made similar purchases, and many trinkets were also sold to the soldiers, who considered them a good investment for their money. Indeed, no small portion of the earnings of the natives of India are spent upon silver ornaments for their women, as they can at any time be converted into cash. The commoner cloths, knives, beads, and trinkets were almost all disposed of by the end of the day, for as no traders had come up for 6 months, and as a long time might elapse before others did so, the garrison were glad to lay in a store of useful articles for themselves and families, especially as the prices of all the goods were at least as low as they could have been bought in town. "We shan't leave much behind us," Dick said, as he looked around over the last customers had left, and they had sat down to their evening meal. "Almost all the silver work in the better class of goods have gone, and I should say 3/4 of the rest. I dare say we shall get rid of the remainder tomorrow. I don't suppose many of the soldiers stationed down by the gate have come up yet, but when they hear that we sell cheaply, some of them will be here tomorrow. We have made no money by the transaction, but at any rate we shall have got back the outlay. Of course, I should not have cared if we got nothing back. Still, it's satisfactory to have cleared oneself. I wonder how Ibrahim is getting on, down in the wood." "He won't be expecting us today," Surajah replied, "but I have no doubt he will begin to feel anxious by tomorrow night. I wish we could have seen some way of getting the horses down. It will be awkward doing without them." "Yes, I hope we shall get a good start. Of course, we must put on our peasants' dresses again. I am glad enough to be rid of that rope, though I have had to put it on 2 or 3 additional things, to fill me out to the same size as before. Still, I don't feel so bound in as I did, though it is horribly hot." "I am sure I shall be glad to get rid of all this stuffing," Surajah said. I felt ready to faint today when the room was full." "Well, we have only one more day of it," Dick said. "I do hope Father will be able to get out by 10 o'clock. Then before 11 we shall be at the edge of the rock. So we are 2 hours in getting down, and walking round to join Ibrahim. That will take us till 1, and we shall have a good 5 hours before Father's escape will be discovered. They will know that he can't have gone down the road, and it will take them fully 2 hours to search the fort, and all over the rock. It will be 8 o'clock before they set out in pursuit, and by that time we ought to be well on the road between Cenopatam and Anicull. If we can manage to buy horses at Cenopatam, of course we will do so. We shall be there by 5 o'clock, and ought to be able to get them in a couple of hours. Once on horseback, we are safe. I don't think they will pursue us very far, perhaps not even so far as Cenopatam, for the governor will see that he had better not make any fuss about a white captive having escaped, when it was not known that he had one there at all. I think it more likely that when he finds Father has got fairly away, he will take no steps at all. They have no cavalry here, and he will know well enough that there will be no chance of our being tracked and overtaken by footmen, if we had but a couple of hours' start." "I think that is so, Dick. He has done his duty in keeping your father a prisoner, but I don't think he will be at heart at all sorry that he has made his escape. I think Surajah will write a letter to him, and leave it here to be found after we have got away, thanking him in Father's name for the kindness that he has always shown him, saying who I am, why I came here, and asking his pardon for the deception that I have been obliged to play upon him. He is a good old fellow, and I should think it would please him." "I should think it would," Surajah agreed. "I will do up my brace of pistols in a packet, and put them with the note," Dick went on, "and will say in it that I hope he will accept them as a token of our esteem and gratitude. They are well finished English pistols, and I have no doubt he will prize them. I will mention, too, that we shall have made our escape at 11 o'clock, and therefore by the time he receives my letter we shall be far beyond the reach of pursuit. I dare say that will decide him upon letting the matter pass quietly, and he will see himself that, by making no fuss over it, no one outside the fortress will ever know that a prisoner has escaped." The next day passed comparatively quietly. A good many soldiers and women came up from below, and before sunset their goods were completely cleared out. The governor came over in the afternoon and had a talk with them. They expressed their satisfaction at the result of their trading, and said that they should be off before sunrise. "I hope you will come again," he said, "but not for another 6 months, for assuredly you will take away with you pretty nearly every rupee in the fortress. My wife and the other ladies are well content with their purchases, and agree that they would not have got them cheaper at Seringapatam or Bangalore." "We try to buy cheaply and sell cheaply," Surajah said modestly. "In that way we turn over our money quickly, but it is seldom indeed that we find so good a market as we have done here. When we left Bangalore we thought it might be a month before we should have to go back there to replenish our packs from our magazine, but we shall only have been away 5 or 6 days." "I am glad that you are content, for you are honest traders, and not like some of the rascals that have come up to the forts I have commanded, and fleeced the soldiers right and left." Although not given to blushing, Dick felt he coloured under his dye at the praise, for although they had certainly sold cheaply, he doubted whether the term honest could be faintly applied to the whole transaction. As 10 o'clock approached, the two friends sat with open door, listening intently for every sound. Conversation was still going on in the houses, and occasionally they could make out a dark figure crossing the yard. It was not yet 10 when a light footfall was heard, and a moment later Captain Holland appeared at the door. "It's all right so far," he said, "but wait 5 minutes to give me time to get the ladder fixed. You had better come one by one, and stroll quietly across the yard. It's too dark for anyone to recognize you unless they run right against you, and even if they do so they will not think it strange you should be out, after having been cooped up all day." In another moment he was gone. They had each, during the day, gone out for a time, and had walked round through the narrow lane behind the governor's house, to see that there were no obstructions that they might fall over in the dark. They agreed, on comparing notes, that Captain Holland had chosen the best possible place for scaling the wall, for the lane was evidently quite unused, and the house, which was higher than the wall, would completely screen them from observation. In 5 minutes Dick followed his father, leaving Surajah to come on in a minute or two. They had secured about them the gold and silver they had received for their purchases, but they left behind a large heap of copper coins, on the top of which Dick had placed his letter to the governor, and the parcel containing the brace of pistols. He met no one on his way to the rendezvous, but almost ran against his father in the dark. "Steady, Dick, or you will run me down," Captain Holland said. "I have got the ladder fixed, so you had better go up at once. Take these 3 spears with you. I will bring the long ladder." "We shan't want the spears, Father. We have a brace of double barrelled pistols, and 2 brace of single barrels." "Never mind that, Dick. You will see that they will come in useful." Dick took the spears and mounted the ladder without further question. His father then came up and placed the long rope, which with the pieces of wood was a bulky bundle, on the wall, and then descended again. It was another 5 minutes before Surajah came up. "I was stopped on the way," he said, "and had to talk with one of the officers." He and the captain were soon by Dick's side. The ladder was then pulled up and lowered on the other side of the wall. They were soon standing at its foot. "Shall I jerk the ladder down, Father?" "I think not, Dick. It would only make a clatter, and it is no matter to us whether they find it in the morning or not. You had better follow me. I know every foot of the ground, and there are some nasty places, I can tell you." They had to make several detours to avoid ravines running deep into the plateau, and for a time Captain Holland walked very cautiously. When he had passed these, he stepped out briskly, and in less than an hour from starting they were near the edge of the precipice. Their eyes had by this time become accustomed to the darkness. "We are just there now," Captain Holland said, "but we must go very cautiously, for the rock falls sheer away without warning. Ah! There is the edge, a few yards ahead of me. Now, do you stay where you are, while I feel about for that spearhead I put in to mark the place. It had about 3 feet of the staff on it. If it were not for that, there would be small chance of finding it. I know it is somewhere close here." In a few minutes he returned to them. "I have found it," he said. "Keep close behind me." After walking for 50 yards he stopped. "Here it is, lads. Now give me those spears, Dick." He thrust them firmly into the ground, a few inches apart. "Throw your weight on them too," he said. "That's right. Now they will stand many times the strain we shall put on them. I have chosen this place, Dick, for 2 reasons. In the first place, because it is the most perpendicular, and in the second, because the soil and grass project slightly over the edge of the rock. There is a cushion in that bundle, and 4 spearheads. I will peg it down close to the edge, and the rope will run easily over it. Now, Surajah, we had better let you down first. You will be tied quite securely, and there will be no risk whatever, as you know, of the rope giving way. I should advise you to keep your eyes shut till you get to the bottom, for the rope will certainly twist round and round, but keep your arms well in front of you, and whenever you feel the rock, open your eyes and send yourself off with your arms and legs. I don't think you will touch, for at this point it seems to me, as I look down, that the rock projects farther out than anywhere else on the face of the precipice, and that a stone dropped straight down would fall some 14 or 15 feet from its foot. Would you like me to bandage your eyes?" "No, thank you. I will keep my eyes closed." "That is the best thing you can do," Captain Holland said, "though it is so dark that you would not be able to see if you did. When you get to the bottom, untie the rope, pull it gently down, and call out to me whether the lowest piece of slick touches the ground. If it does not, I will pull it up again and fasten on some more. I have got a dozen spare ones with me." Captain Holland then told Surajah and Dick to take off their upper garments. These he wound round and round the lower 4 feet of the rope, increasing its diameter to over 2 inches. "There," he said, as he fastened this round Surajah's body under the arms. "It won't hurt you now. That silk rope would have cut in an inch deep before you got to the bottom, if it had not been covered." Then he took off his own garment, made it up into a roll, lashed one end of the rope in the centre of Surajah's back, passed it between his legs, and fastened it to the knot at his chest. "There," he said, "that will prevent any possibility of the thing slipping up over your shoulders, and will take a lot of the strain off your chest." Then he lay down and crawled toward the edge, pegged the cushion down, and then, turning to Surajah, said, "All is ready now." Surajah had felt rather ashamed that all these precautions should be taken for him, while the others would have to rely solely upon their hands and feet, and, sternly repressing any sign of nervousness, he stepped forward to the side of Captain Holland. "That's right," the captain said approvingly. "Now lie down by my side, and work yourself backwards. Go over on one side of the cushion, for you might otherwise displace it. I will hold your wrists and let you over. Dick will hold the rope. I will put it fairly on the cushion, then I shall take it and stand close to the edge, and pay it out gradually as you go down. If you should find any projecting piece of rock, call out 'Stop!' I'll hold on at once. We can then talk over how we can best avoid the difficulty. When you are down, and I tell you Dick is coming, take hold of one of the steps, and hold the ladder as firmly as you can, so as to prevent it from swaying about. Now, are you ready?" "Quite ready," Surajah said in a firm voice. Dick, who was standing 5 or 6 yards back, tightened the rope. Gradually he saw Surajah's figure disappear over the edge. "Slack out a little bit," his father said. "That's right. I've got it over the cushion. Now hold it firmly until I am on my feet. That's right. Now, pay it out gradually." It seems an endless time to Dick before his father exclaimed, "The strain is off. Thank God, he has got down all right." A minute later there was a slight pull on the rope, and the captain paid it out until he heard a call from below. "Have you got to the lowest stick?" he asked, leaning over. "Yes, it is just touching the ground." "Oh, not such a bad guess," the captain said as he turned to Dick. "There are about 20 feet left." He now fastened the rope round the spears in the ground. "I'll lower you down, if you like, Dick. You are half as heavy again as that young native, but I have no doubt that I can manage it." "Not at all, Father. I am not a bit nervous about it. If it was light I should not feel so sure of myself, for I might turn giddy, but there is no fear of my doing so now." "Well, lad, it's as well to be on the safe side, and I manufactured this yesterday." He put a loop, composed of a rope some 4 feet long, over Dick's shoulders and under his arms. To each end was attached a strong double hook, like 2 fingers. "There, lad. Now, if you feel at all tired or shaky, all you have to do is hook this one on to one of the steps. Do you see? One hook on each side of the cord. That way you can rest as long as you like, and then go on again. You say you can go down a rope with your hands only. I should advise you to do that if you can, and not use your legs unless you want to sit down on one of the long steps. For, as you know, if you use your feet, the rope will go in till they are almost level with your head, while if you use your arms only it will hang straight down." "I know, Father, and I don't suppose I shall have to rest at all, for these cross sticks make it 10 times as easy as having to grip the rope only." Dick laid himself down as Surajah had done, and crawled backward until he was lying half over the edge. Then he seized the rope and began to descend, hand over hand. He counted the rungs as he went down, and halfway he sat down on one of the long pieces, hitched the hooks on to the one above, and rested his arms. After a short pause he continued until he reached the bottom. The captain, who was stooping with his hand on the rope, felt the vibration cease, and as he leaned over he heard Dick call out, "I'm all right, Father. Those bits of wood make easy work of it." Then the captain at once began to descend, and was soon standing beside his son and Surajah. "Thank God that job is finished. How do you both feel?" "My arms feel as if they had done some work, Father. I have been 4 or 5 months without practice, or I should hardly have felt it." "And how are you, Surajah?" "I feel ashamed at having been let down like a baby, Captain Holland, and at being so nervous." "There is nothing to be ashamed of," Captain Holland said. "Rope climbing is a thing that only comes with practice, and as to nervousness, most landsmen are afraid to trust themselves to a rope at all. Did you open your eyes?" "Not once, Sahib. I kept my arms out, as you told me, but I did not touch anything. I could feel that I was spinning round and round, and was horribly frightened just at first, but I went down so smoothly and quietly that the feeling did not last long, for I knew that the rope was very strong, and as I did not touch anything, it seemed to me that there could be no fear of it being cut against the rock." The clothes were soon unwound from the rope and put on again. Captain Holland cut off all the slack of the rope and made it into a coil. "The slope is all right as far as I could see from the top, but we may come across nasty bits again, and this will stand in useful if we do." They went down cautiously, but at a fair rate of speed, until, without meeting with any serious difficulty, they arrived on the plain. 4 miles brisk walking brought them to the grove where Ibrahim had been left, and they had scarce entered among the trees when he asked, "Who is that is coming?" "It's us, Ibrahim. We have got my father." Ibrahim gave an exclamation of joy, and a minute later they joined him. "You were not asleep then, Ibrahim?" Dick asked. "Oh, no, my lord. I have slept during the day and watched at night, but I did not sleep yesterday, for I was growing sorely anxious, and had begun to fear that harm had befallen you." "Well, let us be off at once. Of course, we have had to leave the horses behind us, and I want to be at Senapatam by daybreak. We will buy horses there." They struck across the country to the southwest until they came on a road between Magri and Senapatam, and arrived within sight of the latter town just at daybreak. As they walked, Dick and Surajah had, with no small amount of pain, removed their beards and the patches of hair. "You both ought to have shaved before you put those things on," Captain Holland said, as they muttered exclamations of pain. "You see, cobbler's wax, or whatever it is, sticks to what little down there is on your cheeks and chin, and I don't wonder that it hurts horribly pulling it off. If you had shaved first, you would not have felt any of it." "I'll remember that, Father, if I ever have to disguise myself again," Dick said. "I feel as if I were pulling the whole skin off my face." The painful task was at last finished. "I shall be glad to have a look at you in the morning, Dick," his father said, "so as to see what you are really like, of which I have not the least idea at present. You must feel a deal more comfortable now that you have got rid of the rope." "I am indeed. I am sure Surajah must be quite as much pleased at leaving his padding behind." They stopped half a mile from the town, which was a place of considerable size. Dick took from the saddlebag of the horse Ibrahim was leading the bottle of liquid with which he was in the habit of renewing his staining every few days, and darkened his father's face and hands. Then they took off their costumes as merchants, and put on their peasants' attire. Dick directed Ibrahim to make a detour so as to avoid the town, and come down on the road half a mile beyond it, and there wait until they rejoined them, for his father was to accompany Ibrahim. It was growing light as Dick and Surajah entered the town, and in half an hour the streets became alive with people. After some search they found a man who had several horses to sell, and after the proper amount of bargaining they purchased 3 fairly good animals. Another half hour was occupied in procuring saddles and bridles, and after riding through quiet streets to avoid questioning, they left the town and soon rejoined their companions. "Now, Surajah," Dick said, "we will be colonels again for a bit." The saddlebags were again opened, and in a few minutes they were transformed. "Why, where on earth did you get those uniforms?" Captain Holland asked in surprise. "Those sashes are the signs that their wearers are officers of the palace, for I have seen them more than once in Kishnagari, and the badges are those of colonels. There is nothing like impudence, Dick, but it seems to me it would have been safer if you had been contented with sub-officers' uniforms." Dick laughed. "We are wearing them because we have a right to them," Dick laughed. "We are both colonels in Tippoo's armies, and officers of the palace. That is, we were so until a month ago, though I expect since then our names have been struck off their army list. I'll tell you about it as we ride." "You had better tell me afterwards, Dick. I have never ridden a horse in my life, except when they were taking me from the coast to Mysore, and I shall have enough to do to keep my seat and attend to my steering, without trying to listen to you." They rode all day, passed through Anakul and Ossur, and halted for the night in a grove 2 or 3 miles farther on. They had not been questioned as, at a walk, they went through the town. Captain Holland had ridden behind with Ibrahim, and the latter had stopped and laid in a stack of provisions at Anakul. "Thank goodness that is over," Captain Holland said as they dismounted. "I feel as if I had been beaten all over with sticks, and am as hungry as a hunter." "Ibrahim will have some food ready in half an hour, Father, and I shall be glad of some myself, though you know we all had some chapatis he bought." "They were better than nothing, Dick, but a pancake or two does not go very far, with men who have been travelling since 10 o'clock last night. Well, lad, I am glad that you have got rid of your beard, and that, except for that brown skin, I am able to have a look at you as you are. You will be bigger than I am, Dick, bigger by a good bit, I should say, and any father might be proud of you, much more so one who has been fetched out from a captivity from which he had given up all hope of escaping. As it is, lad, words can't tell you how grateful I feel to God for giving me such a son." "My dear Father, it's Mother's doing. It has been her plan, ever since she heard that you were wrecked, that we should come out here to find you, and she has had me regularly trained for it. I had masters for fencing and gymnastics. We always talked Hindustani when we were together, and she has encouraged me to fight with other boys, so that I should get strong and quick." That evening, by the fire, Dick told his father the whole story of his life since he had been in India. "Well, my lad, you have done wonders," his father said when he had finished, "and if I had as much enterprise and go as you have, I should have been out of this place years ago. But in the first place, I was very slow in picking up their lingo. You see, until within the last 3 or 4 years, there have always been other Englishmen with me. Of course, we talked together, and as most of them were able to speak a little of the lingo, there was no occasion for me to learn it. Then I was always, from the first, when they saw that I was handy at all sorts of things, kept at odd jobs, and so got less chance of picking up the language than those who were employed in drilling, or who had nothing to do but talk to their guards. But most of all, I did not try to escape, because I found that if I did so, it would certainly cost my companions their lives. That was the way that scoundrel Tippoo kept us from making attempts to get off. Well, soon after the last of the other captives was murdered, we moved away to Kishnagari, which was a very difficult place to escape from, and besides, very soon after we got there, I heard of the war with our people, and hoped that they would take the place. It was, as you may suppose, a terrible disappointment to me when they failed in their attack on it. Still, I hoped that they would finally trash Tippoo, and that somehow I might get handed over to them. However, as you know, when peace was made, and Kishnagari had to be given over, the governor got orders to evacuate it, without waiting for the English to come up to take possession. Well, since I have been here at Savandroog, I have thought often of trying to get away. By the time I got there, I had learned to speak the language fairly enough to make my way across the country, and I have been living in hopes that somehow or other I might get possession of a rope long enough to let myself down the rocks. But, as I told you, I have never so much as seen one up there 20 feet long. I did think of gradually buying enough cotton cloth to twist up and make a rope of, but you see, when one has been years in captivity, one loses a lot of one's energy. If I had been worse off, I should have set about the thing in earnest, but you see, I was not badly treated at all. I was always doing odd carpentering jobs for the colonel and officers, and armourers' work at the guns. Any odd time I had over, I did jobs for the soldiers and their wives. I got a good many little presents, enough to keep me in decent clothes and decent food, if you can call the food you have up there decent, and to provide me with tobacco, so that except when I was a prisoner, and for the thought of my wife and you, I had really nothing to grumble about, and was indeed better off than anyone in the fortress, except the officers. So you see, I just existed, always making up my mind that some day I should see a good chance of making my escape, but not really making any preparations toward casting off my moorings. Now, Dick, it must be past 12 o'clock, and I am dog-tired. How far have we to ride tomorrow? Oh, it's 35 miles from Mysore to Kishnagari, which will be far enough for us to go tomorrow. And then another 25 will take us down to Tripatli. As the horses have gone about 40 miles, it would be a long journey for them to go right through tomorrow. And I don't think I could do it, Dick, if they could. I expect I shall be stiffer tomorrow than I am now. Eager as I am to see your dear mother, I don't want to have to be lifted off my horse when I arrive there, almost speechless with fatigue. The next day they rode on to Kishnagari, passing a small frontier fort without question. They slept at the post house there, Dick and Surajah having removed their scarves and emblems of rank as soon as they passed the frontier, in order to escape all inquiries. They started next morning at daybreak, and arrived within sight of Tripatli at 10 o'clock. "Now, Father, I will gallop on," Dick said. "I must break the news to Mother before you arrive." "Certainly, Dick," his father, who had scarcely spoken since they started, replied. "I have been feeling very anxious about it all the morning, for though, as you tell me, she has never lost faith in my being alive, my return cannot be but a great shock to her." Dick rode on, and on arriving at the palace was met in the courtyard by the Rajah, who was on the point of going out on horseback. He dismounted at once. "I am truly glad to see you back, Dick, for your mother has been in a sad state of anxiety about you. 8 days ago she started up from a nap she was taking in the middle of the day, and burst out crying, saying that she was certain you were in some terrible danger, though whether you were killed or not she could not say. Since then she has been in a bad state. She has scarcely closed an eye, and has spent her whole time in walking restlessly up and down." "Oh, it was quite true that I was in great danger, Uncle, and I am sorry indeed that she is in this state, for my coming home will be a shock to her, and she has an even greater one to bear. Surajah and I have rescued my father, and he will be here in a few minutes." "I congratulate you," the Rajah said warmly. "That is news indeed, news that I, for one, never expected to hear. It is simply marvellous, Dick. However, I am sure that your mother is not fit to bear it at present. I will go up now and tell Gholla to break your return gradually to her. I will say nothing about your father to your aunt. As soon as the news that you are here is broken, you must go to your mother. Tell her as little as possible. Pretend that you are hungry, and have a meal sent up, and persuade her to take some nourishment. Then declare positively that you won't tell her anything about your adventures until she has had a long sleep. Gholla will prepare a sleeping draught for her. In the meantime, I will ride off, directly I have seen my wife, to meet Surajah and your father, and bring him on here. I shan't tell anyone who he is, in case a chance word should come to your mother's ears. If she wakes up again this evening, and asks for you, you must judge for yourself whether to tell her anything, or to wait until morning. You might perhaps, if she seems calm, gladden her with the news that, from what you have heard, you have very strong hopes that a prisoner in keeping at one of the hill forts is your father. Then tomorrow morning you can tell her the whole truth. Now I will run up to Gholla. There is no time to be lost." "I shall be in the dining room, Uncle, when I am wanted." A few minutes later Gholla came in hastily. "Your mother has fainted, Dick. I broke the news to her very gently, but it was too much for her in her weak state. When she comes round again, and is able to talk, I will fetch you. In the meantime, I will send Annie in to you." 2 minutes later the girl ran in with a flushed face, threw herself into Dick's arms, and kissed him. "I can't help it, Dick," she said, "so it is of no use your scolding me. This is a surprise. Who would have thought of your coming back so soon? But it is lucky you did. Your mother has been in a sad way, and she was so sure that you had been in some terrible danger that I have been almost as anxious as she was. And now it seems that I need not have been frightened at all." "I was in great danger, Annie. Just at the time my mother dreamt about me, Surajah, Ibrahim, and I were attacked by a party of stranglers disguised as merchants, and if it had not been that I had some strange suspicion of them, we should all have been murdered. As it was, we shot the whole gang, who, fortunately for us, had no firearms." "It must have been your mother who warned you," Annie said gravely. "She told us that she dreamt you were in some terrible danger, though she could not remember what it was, and she tried with all her might to warn you." "Perhaps it was that, Annie. I don't know why I suspected them so strongly. Surajah quite laughed at the idea. Anyway, it saved our lives." "And how are you getting on, Annie? Are you happy?" "Oh, so happy!" she exclaimed. "At least I was until your mother got ill, and I was working very hard at my lessons, but of course that has all been stopped, as far as taking them for her is concerned. I have gone on working, and the Rajah's sons have been very good, and helped me sometimes, and I begin to read words of 2 letters. And what has brought you back so soon?" "That I can't tell you yet, Annie. I will only tell you that it is not bad news, and no one but my uncle will know more than that, till I have told my mother. Even my aunt won't hear it." "Has Surajah come back too, Dick?" "Yes. I heard horses in the courtyard just now, and I have no doubt it was him. I rode on first, being anxious to see my mother." They chatted for a few minutes. Then the Rajah came to the door, and called Dick into the next room. "I have settled your father in the room at the other end of the gallery, Dick. He agreed with me that it was better for him to keep there by himself, until you have told your mother that he is here. I have just ordered a meal to be sent, and after that will send my barber in to shave him. He says your mother will never recognize him, with all that hair on his face. I am going to see if something cannot be done to take the stain off his face, and shall then set half a dozen tailors to work on some dark blue cloth, to turn him out a suit before tomorrow morning, in what he calls sailor fashion, so that he may appear before your mother in something like the style in which she remembers him." A few minutes later Gholla came in and said that Mrs. Holland was ready for Dick to go in to her. Dick found his mother looking pale and weak, but the joy of his coming had already brightened her eyes, and given a faint flush to her cheeks. "I have been so dreadfully anxious, Dick," she said, after the first embrace. "I was certain you had been in some terrible danger." "I have been, but thank God I escaped, owing, I think, to the warning Annie says you tried to give me. But we must not talk about that now. I will tell you all the story tomorrow. You are really not fit to talk. You must take some broth and some wine, and a sleeping draught, and I hope you will go off and not waken up till tomorrow morning. Now, you do as I tell you. While you are drinking your broth, I will go in and take something to eat, for I have had nothing today, and I am as hungry as a hunter. Then I will come back and sit by you till you go off to sleep." He was not long away, but he was met at the door by his aunt, who said, "She has gone off already, Dick. I have no doubt that she will sleep many hours, but if she wakes, I will let you know at once." "If that is the case, Gholla," the Rajah, who had come in at the same moment, said, "I can let you into a secret, which no one but myself knows yet, but which, now that Margaret is asleep, can be told." Gholla was very pleased when she heard the news, and Dick went off at once to his father. It was a great relief to the latter to know that his wife had gone off to sleep, and would probably be well enough to have the news broken to her in the morning. "I hear that you are preparing for the meeting, Father, by getting yourself shaved and having a blue cloth suit made." "Yes, Dick, I should like to be as much like my old self as possible." "I don't think Mother will care much what you look like, Father. Still, it is very natural that you should want to get rid of all that hair." "What bothers me, lad," Captain Holland went on, putting his hand to the back of his neck, is this shaved spot here. Of course, with the turban on and the native rig it was all right, but it will take a rum affair in English clothes." Dick could not help laughing at his father's look of perplexity. "Well, Father, it's just the same with myself. I have not changed yet, but when I do, the hair above, which is now tucked up under the turban, will be quite long enough to come down to the nape of the neck, and hide that bare place till the hair grows again." "Yes, I did not think of that. My hair is long enough to come down over my shoulders. I was going to tell the barber to cut it short all over, but I will see now that he allows for that. Now, Father, do you mind my bringing in Annie Mansfield? I know she will be wanting to keep close to me all day, and I should never be able to get rid of her without telling her about you." "Bring her in by all means, Dick. She must be a plucky young girl, by what you said about her." "Where have you been, Dick?" Annie inquired, when Dick went out a few minutes later. "I have been looking for you everywhere. Nobody had seen you, unless it was the Rajah. I asked him, and he said that little girls must not ask questions, and then laughed." "You have not brought home another white girl?" she exclaimed suddenly. "Oh, would it not be very nice for you to have a companion, Annie?" "No," she said sharply. "I should not like it at all." "Well, I will take you in to see her, and I think you will like her." "No, I am only joking," he broke off, as he saw tears start into her eyes. "It is not another girl, but you shall see for yourself." He took her hand and led her to his father's room. "There, Annie. This is the gentleman who has come back with me this time." Annie looked at Captain Holland in surprise, and then turned her eyes to Dick for an explanation. "He is a respectable looking old native, isn't he, Annie?" "Yes, he looks respectable," Annie said gravely, "but he doesn't look very old. Why has he come down with you, Dick? He can't have been a slave." "But I have, lass," the captain said in English, to Annie's intense astonishment. "I have been in their hands a year or so longer than you were." Annie turned impulsively to Dick and grasped his arm. "Oh, Dick," she said in an excited whisper, "is it your father, after all?" "Aye, lass," the captain answered for him. "I am the boy's father, and a happy father, too, as you may guess at finding I have such a son. And I hear he has been a good friend to you, too." "Oh, he has indeed," Annie cried, running forward and seizing his hands in both of hers. "I don't think there ever was anyone so kind and good." "What bosh, Annie!" Dick exclaimed almost crossly. "Never mind what he says, my dear. You and I know all about it. Now we can do very well without him for a time. He can go and tell his uncle and cousins all about his adventures, which I have no doubt they are dying to hear, and you and I can sit here and exchange confidences until my barber comes. I don't look much like an Englishman now, but I hope that they will be able to get me something that will take this stain off my face." Mrs. Holland did not wait till evening. She seemed very much better, and had a short chat with Dick. She would have got up, had he not told her that he should be going to bed himself in a short time, and that all his story would keep very well until the morning, when he hoped to find her quite herself again. By dint of the application of various unguents, and a vast amount of hard scrubbing, Captain Holland restored his face to its original hue. "I look a bit sunburnt," he said, "but I have often come back browner than this from some of my voyages." "You look quite like yourself in your portrait at home, Father," Dick said. "It's the shaving and cutting your hair, even more than getting off the dye, that has made the difference. I don't think you look much older than you did then, except that there are a few grey hairs." "I shall look better tomorrow, Dick, when I get these outlandish things off. I have been trying on my new suit, and I think it will do, first rate. Those clothes that you wore on board ship, and handed to them as a model, gave them the idea of what I wanted." And indeed, the next morning, when Captain Holland appeared in his new suit, Dick declared that he looked just as if he had walked down from his picture. The Ranee had agreed to break the news to Mrs. Holland as soon as she was dressed. She came into the room where the others were waiting for breakfast, and said to Captain Holland, "Come, she knows all, and has borne it well." She led him to the door of Mrs. Holland's room and opened it. As he entered there was a cry of, "Oh, Jack, my Jack!" Then she closed the door behind him, and left husband and wife together. A few days afterwards there was a family consultation. "Now, Dick," his father said, "we must settle about your plans. You know we have decided upon going home, by the next ship, and taking Annie with us, without waiting for her father's letter. Of course, I shall have no difficulty in finding out, when I get there, what his address is. I have promised your mother to give up the sea, and settle down again at Shadwell, where I can meet old friends and shall feel at home. We've had a long talk about what you said the other night, about your insisting that we should take the money those jewels of yours fetch. Well, we won't do that." "Then I shall sell them, Father," Dick said positively, "and give the money to a hospital." "I have not finished yet, Dick. We won't take all the money, but we have agreed that we will take a quarter of it. Of course, we could manage on my savings, as your mother did when I was away. We shall lose the little allowance the company made her, but I shall buy a share in a ship with my money, which will bring in a good deal better rate of interest than she got for it in the funds, so we could still manage very well. Still, as we feel that it would please you, we agree to take a quarter of the money the jewels fetch, and that, with what I have, will give us an income well beyond our wants. So that is settled. Now, about yourself. I really don't think that you can do better than what you proposed, when we were talking of it yesterday. You'd be like a fish out of water in England, if you had nothing to occupy your time, and therefore can't be better than enter the service here, and remain, at any rate, for a few years. As your commission was dated from the time you joined Lord Cornwallis, 2.5 years ago, you won't be at the bottom of the tree, and while you are serving you will want no money here, and the interest of your capital will be accumulating. If I invest it in shipping for you, you will get 8 or 10% for it, and as I shall pick good ships, commanded by men I know, and will divide the money up in small shares among half a dozen of them, there will be practically no risk, and of course the vessels will be insured, so that at the end of 10 years, by reinvesting the profits, your money will be more than doubled, and you will have a nice fortune when you choose to come home, even if the jewels do not fetch anything like what you expect." A week later the party journeyed down to Madras, where they stayed for a fortnight. Dick, on his arrival, called upon the governor, who congratulated him most heartily when he heard that he had succeeded in finding and releasing his father, and at once appointed him to one of the native cavalry regiments, and his parents had the satisfaction of seeing him in uniform before they started. Annie showed but little interest in the thought of going to England and being restored to her parents, being at the time too much distressed at parting from Dick to give any thought to other matters. But at last the goodbyes were all said, and as the anchor was weighed, Dick returned on shore in a surf boat, and next day joined his regiment. Surajah had wanted to accompany him to Madras, and to enlist in any regiment to which he might be appointed, and the assurance that it might be a long time before he became a native officer, as these were always chosen from the ranks except in the case of rising new regiments, had little influence with him. The Rajah, however, had finally persuaded him to stay, by the argument that his father, who was now getting on in years, would sorely miss him, that the captain of the troop would also be retiring shortly, and that he should, as a reward for his faithful service to his nephew, appoint him to the command as soon as it was vacant. Ibrahim entered the Rajah's service, preferring that to soldiering. Chapter 21. Home. It was early in December 1792 that Dick Holland joined his regiment, which was stationed at Madras. There were but 5 other officers, and Dick found to his satisfaction that the junior of them had had 4 years' service. Consequently, he did not step over anyone's head, owing to his commission being dated nearly 3 years previously. As there were in the garrison many officers who had served on the general staff in the last war, Dick soon found some of his former acquaintances, and the story of his long search for his father, and its successful termination, soon spread, and gained for him a place in civil as well as military society. The next year passed peacefully, and was an unusually quiet time in India. That Tippoo intended to renew the war as soon as he was able was well known to the government, and one of its chief objects of solicitude was the endeavour to counteract the secret negotiations that were constantly going on between him, the Nizam, and the Mahrattis. Tippoo was known to have sent confidential messengers to all the great princes of India, even to the ruler of Afghanistan, inviting them to join the confederacy of the Mahrattis, the Nizam, and himself, to drive the English out of India altogether. Still greater cause for uneasiness was the alliance that Tippoo had endeavoured to make with the French, who, as he had learned, had gained great successes in Europe, and believing from their account that their country was much stronger than England, he had sent envoys to the Mauritius to propose an offensive and defensive alliance against England. The envoys had been politely received, and some of them had proceeded to France, where Tippoo's proposal had been accepted. They committed France, indeed, to nothing, as she was already at war with England, but the French were extremely glad to embrace the proposal of Tippoo, as they overrated his power, and believed that he would prove a formidable opponent to the English, and would necessitate the employment of additional troops and ships there, and so weaken England's power at home. To confirm the alliance, some 60 or 70 Frenchmen, mostly adventurers, were sent from the Mauritius as civil and military officers. Tippoo's council had been strongly opposed to this step on his part. They had pointed out to him that their alliance with a power at war with the English would render war between the English and him inevitable, and that France was not in a position to aid them in any way. The only benefit, indeed, that he could gain was the possibility that the 14,000 French troops in the service of the Nizam might revolt and come over to him. But even this was doubtful, as these were not troops belonging to the French government, but an independent body raised and officered by adventurers, who might not be willing to imperil their own position and interests by embarking on a hazardous war at the orders of a far distant government. These events happened soon after Dick's return, but nothing was generally known of what was passing, although reports of Tippoo's proceedings had reached the government of India. The party of Frenchmen arrived at Seringapatam, and were, at first, well received by Tippoo. But they had soon disgusted him by their assumption of dictatorial powers, while they, on their part, were disappointed at not receiving the emoluments and salaries they had expected. Most of them very speedily left his service. Some of the military men were employed at Bangalore and other towns in drilling the troops, and a few remained at Seringapatam, neglected by Tippoo, whose eyes were now opened to the character of these adventurers. But this in no way shook his belief that he would obtain great aid from France, as he had received letters from official personages there, encouraging him to combine with other native powers to drive the English out of India, and promising large aid in troops and ships. When the Earl of Mornington, afterwards the Marquis of Wellesley, arrived at Calcutta as Governor-General of India in May 1798, the situation had become so critical that, although the war had not been absolutely declared on either side, Tippoo's open alliance with the French rendered it certain that hostilities must commence ere long, and Lord Mornington lost no time in proceeding to make preparations for war. As Lord Cornwallis had done, he found the greatest difficulty in inducing the supine government of Madras to take any steps. They protested that, were they to make any show of activity, Tippoo would descend the Ghauts and at once ravage the whole country, and they declared that they had no force whatever that could withstand him. They continued in their cowardly inactivity until the Governor-General was forced to override their authority altogether, and take the matter into his own hands. The first step was to curb the Nizam's power, for everything pointed to the probability that he intended to join Mysore, being inclined so to do by Tippoo's promises, and by the influence of the officers of the strong body of French troops in his service. Negotiations were therefore opened by Lord Mornington, who offered to guarantee the Nizam's dominions if he would join the English against Tippoo, and promised that after the war he should obtain a large share of the territory taken from Mysore. The Nizam's position was a difficult one. On one side of him lay the dominions of his warlike and powerful neighbour Tippoo. On the other he was exposed to the incursions of the Mahrattis, whose rising power was a constant threat to his safety. He had, moreover, to cope with a serious rebellion by his son, Ali Jah. He was willing enough to obtain the guarantee of the English against aggressions by the Mahrattis, but he hesitated in complying with the preliminary demand that he should dispense with the French. The fighting powers of this body rendered them valuable auxiliaries, but he secretly feared them and resented their pretensions, which pointed to the fact that ere long, instead of being his servants, they might become his masters. When, therefore, the British government offered him a subsidiary force of 6 battalions, and to guarantee him against any further aggression by the Mahrattis, he accepted the proposal, but in a half-hearted way that showed he could not be relied upon for any efficient assistance in disarming the French auxiliaries. No time was lost by the government in marching the promised force to Hyderabad. The French, 14,000 strong, refused to disband, and were joined by the Nizam's household force, which was in the French interest. The Nizams, terrified by the prospect of a contest, the success of which was doubtful, abandoned the capital and took refuge in a fortress, there to await the issue of events. but positively refused to issue orders to the French to disband. 2 of the English battalions, which were on the other side of the river to that on which the French were encamped, opened a destructive fire upon them, and with red-hot shot set fire to their magazines and storehouses, while the other 4 battalions moved into position to make a direct attack. The Nizam now saw that he had no alternative but to declare openly for the French, or to dismiss them. He preferred the latter alternative. Peron, who commanded the French, saw that unless he surrendered, the position of his force was desperate. Accordingly, on receipt of the order, he and his officers expressed their readiness to accept their dismissal. Their men were, however, in a state of mutiny, and the officers were compelled to make their escape from the camp under cover of night. The next morning the camp was surrounded by the English and the troops of the Nizam, and the French then surrendered without a shot being fired. While the Nizam was thus rendered powerless, negotiations had been going on with the Mahrattis, but owing to the quarrels and jealousies of their chiefs, nothing could be done with them. It was, however, apparent that, for the same reason, Tippoo would equally fail in his attempt to obtain their alliance against us, and that therefore it was with Mysore alone that we should have to deal. In the meantime, though preparing for war, Lord Mornington was most anxious to avoid it. When Tippoo wrote to complain that some villages of his had been occupied by people from Coorg, the Governor-General ordered their immediate restoration to him. In November he sent the Sultan a friendly letter, pointing out that he could look for no efficient aid from France, and that any auxiliaries who might possibly join him would only introduce the principles of anarchy, and the hatred of all religion that animated the whole French nation. That his alliance with them was really equivalent to a declaration of war against England, and as he was unwilling to believe that Tippoo was actuated by unfriendly feelings, or desired to break the engagements of the treaty entered into with him, he offered to send an officer to Mysore to discuss any points upon which variance might have arisen, and arrange a scheme that would be satisfactory to them both. To this letter no answer was received for 5 weeks, by which time Lord Mornington had arrived in Madras. He then received a letter containing a tissue of the most palpable lies concerning Tippoo's dealings with the French. 2 or 3 more letters passed, but as Tippoo's answers were all vague and evasive, the Governor-General issued a manifesto on the 22nd of February, 1799, recapitulating all the grievances against Mysore, and declaring that, though the allies were prepared to repel any attack, they were equally anxious to effect an arrangement with him. But Tippoo still believed that a large French army would speedily arrive. He had received letters from Bonaparte in person, written from Egypt, and saying that he had arrived on the borders of the Red Sea with an innumerable and invincible army, full of the desire to deliver you from the iron yoke of England. Tippoo well knew also that, although the Governor-General spoke for himself and his allies, the Nizam was powerless to render any assistance to the English, and that the Mahrattis were far more likely to join him than they were to assist his foes. The manifesto of Lord Mornington was speedily followed by action, for at the end of January an army of nearly 37,000 men had been assembled at Vellore. Of these, some 20,000 were the Madras force. With them were the Nizam's army, nominally commanded by Mir Alam, but really by Colonel Wellesley, afterward the Duke of Wellington, who had with him his own regiment, the 33rd, 6,500 men under Colonel Dalrymple, 3,621 infantry, for the most part French troops who had re-enlisted under us, and 6,000 regular and irregular horse. Dick, who had now attained the rank of captain, had been introduced by one of Lord Cornwallis's old staff officers to General Harris, who, as general of the Madras army, was in command of the whole. On hearing of the services Dick had rendered in the last war, and that his perfect acquaintance with the language, and with the ground over which the army would pass, would enable him to be equally efficient on the present occasion, General Harris at once detached him from service with the regiment, and appointed him to a post on his own staff. Had it not been that Dick had seen, for the last 2 years, that hostilities must ere long be commenced with Tippoo, he would before this have left the army and returned home. He was heartily tired of the long inaction. When the regiment was stationed at Madras, life was very pleasant, but a considerable portion of his time was spent at outstations, where the duties were very light, and there was nothing to break the monotony of camp life. He received letters regularly from his mother, who gave him full details of their home life. The first that he received merely announced their safe arrival in England. The second was longer and more interesting. They had had no difficulty in discovering the address of Annie's father, and on writing to him he had immediately come up to town. He had lost his wife on his voyage home from India, and was overjoyed at the discovery of his daughter and at her return to England. "He is," Dick's mother wrote, "very much broken in health. Annie behaved very nicely. Poor child, it was only natural that, after what you did for her, and our being all that time with her, the thought of leaving us for her parent, of whom she had no recollection, was a great grief. However, I talked it over with her many times, and pointed out to her that her first duty was to the father who had been so many years deprived of her, and that, although there was no reason why she should not manifest affection for us, she must not allow him to think for a moment that she was not as pleased to see him as he was to welcome her. She behaved beautifully when her father arrived, and when he had been in the house 5 minutes, and spoke of the death of his wife, his bitter regret that she had not lived to see Annie restored to them, the loneliness of his life, and how it would be brightened now that she was again with him. His words so touched her that she threw herself into his arms, and sobbed out that she would do all she could to make his life happy. He had, of course, received the letter we had written to him from Tripataly, and quite pained me by the gratitude he showed for what he called my kindness to his daughter. He said that by his post he should write to endeavour to express some of his feelings to you. Annie went away with him the next day to a place he had bought near Plymouth. He has promised to let us have her for a month every year, and we have promised to go down for the same time every summer to stay with her. He asks numberless questions about you, which neither I nor Annie are ever tired of answering. Even with a mother's natural partiality, I must own that her descriptions are almost too flattering, and he must think that you are one of the most admirable of men. Next, as to the jewels, your father took them to be valued by several diamond merchants, and accepted the highest offer, which was £16,000, of which he has already invested 12 in your name in shares in 6 ships. 4 of these are Indiamen, the other 2 are privateers. He said that he did not think you would object to a quarter of the money being put into a speculative venture, and that they were both good craft, well armed and well commanded, with strong crews, and would, if successful, earn as much in a year as a merchantman would in 10. Since then the letters had been of a uniform character. The shares in the Indiamen were giving a good and steady return. The privateers had been very fortunate, and had captured some rich prizes. Annie had been up, or they had been down, at Plymouth. The letters during the last 3 years had reported her as having grown into a young woman, and, as his mother declared, a very pretty one. After that the allusions to her were less frequent, but it was mentioned that she was as fond of them as ever, and that she was still unmarried. "She always asks when you are coming home, Dick," Mrs. Holland said in the last letter he had received before accompanying General Harris to Vellore. "I told her, of course, that your last letter said that war was certain with Tippoo, that you hoped this time to see Seringapatam taken and the tyrant's power broken, and that after it was over you would come home on leave, and perhaps would not go out again." During the 6 years that he had been in the army, Dick had very frequently been at Tripataly, as there was little difficulty in getting leave for a fortnight. His cousins had now grown up into young men. Surajah commanded the troop, and his stays there were always extremely pleasant. The troop now numbered 200, for with quiet times the population of the territory had largely increased, and the Rajah's income had grown in proportion. The troop was now dressed in uniform, and in arms and discipline resembled the irregular cavalry in the Company's service, and when Dick arrived at Vellore he found his uncle and cousins there with their cavalry. "I thought, Dick, of only sending the boys," the Rajah said, "but when the time came for them to start I felt that I must go myself. We have suffered enough at the hands of Mysore, and I do hope to see Tippoo's capital taken, and his power of mischief put an end to for good and all." "I am glad indeed you are coming, Uncle. You may be sure that, whenever I can get away from my duties with the general, I shall spend most of my time in your camp, though I must occasionally drop in on my own regiment." The Rajah had already been down to Madras a month before, and with his sons had been introduced to General Harris, by the latter's chief of staff, as having been always, like his father before him, a faithful ally of the English, and as having accompanied Lord Cornwallis on the occasion of the last campaign in Mysore. The general had thanked him heartily for his offer to place his 200 cavalry at the disposal of the government, and had expressed a hope that he, as well as his sons, would accompany it into the field. On the 11th of February, 1799, the army moved from Vellore, but instead of ascending by the pass of Amboor, as had been expected, it moved southwest, ascending the pass of Paliode, and on the 9th of March was established without opposition in Tippoo's territory, at a distance of 80 miles east of his capital. They then marched north until they reached a village 10 miles south of Bangalore. This route, although circuitous, was chosen as the roads were better, the country more level, and cultivation much more general, affording far greater facilities for the collection of forage for the baggage animals. Hitherto nothing had been seen of the Mysorean army. It had been confidently expected that Tippoo would fight at least one great battle to oppose their advance against his capital, but so far no signs had been seen of an enemy, and even the Mysore horse, which had played so conspicuous a part in the last campaign, in no way interfered with the advance of the army, or even with the foraging parties. A dispatch that reached them by a circuitous route explained why Tippoo had suffered them to advance so far unmolested. While the Madras army had advanced from the southeast, a Bombay force, 6,500 strong, was ascending the western ghauts. As the advance brigade, consisting of 3 native battalions under Colonel Montresor, reached Sedasir, Tippoo, with 12,000 of his best troops, fell upon it suddenly. His force had moved through the jungle, and attacked the brigade in front and rear. Although thus surprised by an enemy nearly 6 times their superior in force, the Sepoys behaved with a calmness and bravery that could not have been surpassed by veteran troops. Maintaining a steady front, they repulsed every attack, until a brigade encamped 8 miles in their rear came up to their assistance, and Tippoo was then forced to retreat, having suffered a loss of 1,500 men, including many of his best officers. This proof of the inferiority of his troops, even when enormously outnumbering the English, and fighting with all the advantages of surprise, profoundly impressed Tippoo, and from this time he appeared to regard the struggle as hopeless, and displayed no signs whatever of the dash and energy that had distinguished him when leading one of the divisions of his father's army. He marched with his troops straight to Seringapatam, and then moved out with his whole force to give battle to the main body of the invaders. The antagonists came within sight of each other at the village of Malavilli, 30 miles east of the capital. For some time an artillery fire on both sides was kept up. Gradually the infantry became engaged, and the Mysoreans showed both courage and steadiness, until a column of 2,000 men moved forward to attack the 33rd Regiment. The British troops reserved their fire until the column was within 50 yards of them. Then they poured in a withering volley and charged. The column fell back in disorder. General Floyd at once charged them with 5 regiments of cavalry, sabred great numbers of them, and drove the remainder back in headlong rout. The whole British line then advanced, cheering loudly. The first line of Tippoo's army fell back upon its second, and the whole then marched away at a speed that soon left the British infantry far behind them. Instead of continuing his march straight upon the capital, General Harris, learning from spies that Tippoo had wasted the whole country along that line, moved southwest, collecting as he went great quantities of cattle, sheep, and goats, and an abundance of grain and forage, crossed the Cauvery at a ford at Soselay, and on the 5th of April took up his position at a distance of 2 miles from the western face of the fort of Seringapatam. This movement completely disconcerted Tippoo. He had imagined that the attack would, as on the previous occasion, take place on the northern side of the river, and had covered the approaches there with a series of additional fortifications, while on the other side he had done but little. So despondent was he that he called together his principal officers and said to them, "We have arrived at our last stage. What is your determination?" His advisers took no brighter view of the prospect than he did himself. They had unanimously opposed the war, had warned Tippoo against trusting to the French, and had been adverse to measures that could but result in a fresh trial of strength with the English. The Sultan, however, while not attempting to combat their opinion, had gone on his own way, and his officers now saw their worst fears justified. They replied to his question, "Our determination is to die with you." On the day after arriving before Seringapatam, the British attacked the villages and rocky eminences held by the enemy on the south side of the river, and drove them back under the shelter of their guns. General Floyd was sent with the cavalry to meet the Bombay force and escort it to Seringapatam. This was accomplished, and although the whole of the Mysore cavalry and a strong force of infantry hovered round the column, they did not venture to engage it, and on the 14th the whole arrived at the camp before Seringapatam. The Bombay force, which was commanded by General Stuart, crossed to the north bank of the river and took up a position there, which enabled them to take in flank the outlying works and trenches with which Tippoo had hoped to prevent any attack upon the western angle of the fort, where the river was so shallow that it could be easily forded. Tippoo now endeavoured to negotiate, and asked for a conference. General Harris returned an answer enclosing the draft of a preliminary treaty, with which he had been supplied before starting. It demanded one half of Tippoo's territories, a payment of 2 millions sterling, and the delivery of 4 of his sons as hostages. Tippoo returned no reply, and on the 22nd the garrison made a vigorous sortie, and were only repulsed after several hours' fighting. For the next 5 days the batteries of the besiegers kept up a heavy fire, silenced every gun in the outlying works, and compelled their defenders to retire across the river into the fort. Tippoo now sank into such a state of despondency that he would listen to none of the proposals of his officers for strengthening the position, and would not even agree to the construction of a retrenchment, which would cut off the western angle of the fort, against which it was evident the attack would be directed. He knew that, if captured, there was little chance of his being permitted to continue to reign, and had indeed made that prospect more hopeless by massacring all the English prisoners who had, by his order, been brought in from the hill forts throughout the country on his return to Seringapatam, after the repulse he had suffered in his attack on the Bombay force. On the 2nd of May the batteries opened on the wall of the fort, near its northwest angle, and so heavy was their fire that by the evening of the 3rd a breach of 60 yards long was effected. General Harris determined to assault on the following day. General Baird, who had for 4 years been a prisoner in Seringapatam, volunteered to lead the assault, and before daybreak 4,376 men took their places in the advanced trenches, where they lay down. It was determined that the assault should not be made until 1 o'clock, at which time Tippoo's troops, anticipating no attack, would be taking their food and resting during the heat of the day. The troops who were to make the assault were divided into 2 columns, which, after mounting the breach, were to turn right and left, fighting their way along the ramparts until they met at the other end. A powerful reserve under Colonel Wellesley was to support them after they had entered. When the signal was given, the troops leapt from the trenches, and, covered by the fire of the artillery, which at the same moment opened on the ramparts, dashed across the river, scaled the breach, and in 6 minutes from the firing of the signal gun planted the British flag on its crest. Then the heads of the 2 columns at once started to fight their way along the ramparts. At first the resistance was slight. Surprised and panic-stricken, the defenders of the strong works at this point offered but feeble resistance. Some fled along the walls. Some ran down into the fort. Many threw themselves over the wall into the rocky bed of the river. The right column, in less than an hour, had won its way along the rampart to the eastern face of the fort. But the left column met with a desperate resistance, for as each point was carried, the enemy, constantly reinforced, made a fresh stand. Most of the officers who led the column were shot down, and so heavy was the fire that several times the advance was brought to a standstill. It was not until the right column, making their way along the wall to the assistance of their comrades, took them in the rear, that the Mysoreans entirely lost heart. Taken between 2 fires, they speedily became a disorganized mass. Many hundreds were shot down, either in the fort or as, pouring out through the river gate, they endeavoured to cross the ford and escape to the north. As soon as the whole rampart was captured, General Baird sent an officer with a flag of truce to the palace, to offer protection to Tippoo and all its inmates, on condition of immediate surrender. 2 of Tippoo's younger sons assured the officer that the Sultan was not in the palace. The assurance was disbelieved, and the princes being sent to the camp under a strong escort, the palace was searched. The officer in command, on being strictly questioned, declared that Tippoo, who had in person commanded the defence made against the left column, had been wounded, and that he had heard he was lying in a gateway on the north side of the fort. A search was immediately made, and the information proved correct. Tippoo was found lying there, not only wounded but dead. He had indeed received several wounds, and was endeavouring to escape in his palanquin, when this had been upset by the rush of fugitives striving to make their way through the gate. The gateway was indeed almost choked up with the bodies of those who had been either suffocated in the crush or killed by their pursuers. On his palanquin being overturned, Tippoo had evidently risen to his feet, and had at that same moment been shot through the head by an English soldier ignorant of his rank. In the evening he was buried with much state by the side of his father in the mausoleum of Lal Bang, at the eastern extremity of the island. It was with great difficulty that, when the British soldiers became aware of the massacre of their countrymen a few days before, they were restrained from taking vengeance upon his sons and the inmates of the palace. In the assault, 8,000 of the defenders were killed, while the loss of the British during the siege and in the assault amounted to 825 Europeans and 639 native troops. An enormous quantity of cannon, arms, and ammunition was captured, and the value of the treasure and jewels amounted to considerably over £1,000,000, besides the doubtlessly large amount of jewels that had, in the first confusion, fallen into the hands of the soldiers. As Dick, after the fighting had ceased, went, by order of the general, to examine the prisoners and ascertain their rank, his eye fell upon an old officer whose arm hung useless by his side, broken by a musket ball. He went up to him and held out his hand. "Mirza Muhammad Buckshai," he exclaimed, "I am glad to meet you again, although sorry to see that you are wounded." The officer looked at him in surprise. "You have spoken my name," he said, "but I do not know that we have ever met before." "We have met twice. The first time I was with a friend dressed as one of Tippoo's officers, and came to examine the state of Savandroog. The second time we were dressed as merchants, and I succeeded in effecting the liberation of my father. Both times I received much kindness at your hands, but far more grateful am I to you for your goodness to my father, whose life you preserved. I see you still carry the pistols I left for you, and doubtless you also received the letter I placed with them." "Thanks be to Allah," the old colonel said, "that we have thus met again. Truly I rejoiced when my first anger that I had been fooled passed away, that your father had escaped, and that without my being able to blame myself for carelessness. Your letter to me completed my satisfaction, for I felt that Heaven had rightly rewarded the efforts of a son who had done so much, and risked his life for a father. Is he alive? Is he here? I should be glad to see him again, and indeed I missed him sorely. I have been here for 2 years, having been appointed to a command among the troops here. My father is well, and is in England. He will, I know, be glad indeed to hear that I have met you, for he will ever retain a grateful remembrance of your kindness. Now I must finish my work here, and will then go to the general and beg him to give me an order for your release." An hour later Dick returned with the order, and carried Muhammad Buckshai off to the Rajah's camp. Here his arm was set by one of the surgeons, and he was so well cared for by the Rajah, Dick, and Surajah that a fortnight later he was convalescent, and was able to rejoin his wife in the town. "I am thankful," he said on leaving, "that my life as a soldier is over, and that I shall never more have to fight against the English. Tippoo was my master, but it is he who, by his cruelty and ambition, has brought ruin upon Mysore. I have saved enough to live in comfort for the rest of my life, and to its end I shall rejoice that I have again met the son of my friend Jack." The capture of Seringapatam was followed at once by the entire submission of the whole country. A descendant of the old Rajah of Mysore was placed upon the throne. His rule, however, was a nominal one. A very large amount of territory was annexed. The island of Seringapatam was permanently occupied as a British possession. The new Rajah was bound to receive and pay a large military force for the defence of his territories, not to admit any European foreigners into his dominions, to allow the company to garrison any fort in Mysore that might seem advisable to them, and to pay, at all times, attention to such advice as might be given him as to the administration of his affairs. He was, in fact, to be but a puppet, the British becoming the absolute rulers of Mysore. The family of Tippoo and the ladies of the harem were removed to Vellore, where they were to receive a palace suitable to their former rank and expectations, and allowances amounting to £160,000 a year. Thus Mysore, one of the most ancient and powerful of the kingdoms of India, fell into the hands of the English, owing to the ambition, bigotry, and besotted cruelty of the son of a usurper. Dick's part in all these operations had been a busy, although not a very dangerous one. The only share he had taken in the active fighting had been in the battle of Malavilly, where, having been sent with a message to Colonel Floyd just before he led the cavalry to the assault of the column that had attacked the 33rd, he took his place by the side of the Rajah and his cousins, whose troop formed part of Floyd's command, and joined in the charge on the enemy. He had, however, rendered great services in the quartermaster's department, was very highly spoken of in the despatches of General Harris, and his name appeared, as promoted to the rank of major, in the list of honours promulgated by Lord Mornington at the termination of the campaign. His regiment was among those selected for the occupation of Mysore, and a month after the capture of the city he obtained leave to return to England. He stayed for a week at Tripataly, and then took an affectionate farewell of his uncle, the Rani, his cousins, and Surajah, and sailed from Madras a fortnight later. The ship in which he was a passenger was accompanied by 2 other Indiamen, and when a fortnight out they encountered a French frigate, which, however, they beat off, and arrived in England without further adventure. As soon as he landed, Dick drove to the house where his father and mother had taken up their residence on their arrival in England, but he found to his surprise that 8 months before they had moved to another in the village of Hackney. He proceeded there, and found it to be a considerably larger one than they had left, and standing in its own grounds, which were of some extent. He had written to them after the fall of Seringapatam, and told them that he should probably sail for England about 6 weeks later. As the vehicle drove to the door, his father and mother ran out. His father grasped his hand, and his mother threw her arms around his neck with tears of joy. As soon as the first greeting was over, Dick saw a young lady in deep mourning standing on the steps. He looked at her for a moment in surprise, and then exclaimed, "It's Annie Mansfield!" Annie held out her hand and laughed. "We are both changed almost beyond recognition, Dick." Then she added demurely, "The last time I had to ask you." "You shan't have to ask me again, Annie," he said, giving her a hearty kiss. "My first impulse was to do it, but I did not know whether your sentiments on the subject had changed." "I am not given to change," she said. "Am I, Mrs. Holland?" "I don't think you are, my dear. I think there is a little spice of obstinacy in your composition. But come in, Dick. Don't let us stand talking here at the door, when we have so much to say to each other." He went into the sitting room with his father and mother, where Annie presently left them to themselves. "Why, Father, the privateers must have done well indeed," Dick said, looking round the handsome room. "I have nothing to grumble at on that score, Dick, though they have not been so lucky the last 2 years. But it's not their profits that induced us to move here. You see, Annie was in mourning. Her father died nearly a year ago, and at her earnest request, as he said in his will, appointed us her guardians until she came of age, which will be in a few months now. As he had no near relations, he left the whole of his property to her, and having been in India in the days when, under Warren Hastings, there were good pickings to be obtained, it amounted to a handsome fortune. She said that she should come and live with us, at any rate until she became of age, and as that house of ours, though a comfortable place, was hardly the sort of a house for an heiress, she herself proposed that we should take a larger house between us. And so here we are. We shall stay here through the winter, and then we are going down to her place at Plymouth for the summer. What we shall do afterwards is not settled. That must depend upon a variety of things." "She has grown much prettier than I ever thought she would do," Dick said. "Of course, I knew she would have grown into a woman, but somehow I never realized it until I saw her, and I believe I have always thought of her as being still the girl I carried off from Seringapatam." In a few minutes Annie joined them, and the talk then turned upon India, and many questions were asked as to their friends in Tripataly. "I suppose by this time, Annie, at least I hope I may still call you Annie." "If you call me anything else, I shall not answer," she said indignantly. "Well, I was going to say, I suppose you have got a good deal beyond words of 2 letters, now." "I regard the question as an impertinent one. I have even mastered geography, the meaning of which word, you may remember, you explained to me, and I have a partial knowledge of history." The next day Dick met an old friend, Ben Birkett. Dick had kept his promise, and had written to him as soon as he returned to Tripataly with his father, and a few weeks after Captain Holland's return, his old shipmate came to see him and his wife. Ben had for some time thought of retiring, and he now left the sea, and settled down in a little cottage near by. Captain Holland insisted upon settling a small pension upon him, and he was always a welcome guest at the house. His delight at Dick's return was extreme. "I never thought you'd do it, Master Dick, never for a moment; and when, on coming home, I got your letter and found out that the captain and your mother were in England, it just knocked me foolish for a bit." 3 weeks later, Dick told Annie that he loved her. He spoke without any circumlocution, merely taking her hand one evening, when they happened to be alone together, and telling her so in plain words. "I know nothing of women, Annie," he said, "or their ways. I have been bothering myself how to set about it, but though I don't know how to put it, I do know that I love you dearly. All these years I have been thinking about you, not like this, you know, but as the dear, plucky little girl of the old days." "The little girl of old days, Dick," she said quietly, "is in no way changed. I think you know what I thought of you then. I have never for a moment wavered. I gave you all the love of my heart, and you have had it ever since." "Why, you silly boy," she said with a laugh a few minutes later, "I had begun to think that, just as I had to ask you for a kiss in the old times, and again when you met me, I should have had to take this matter in hand. Why, I never thought of anything else. Directly I got old enough to look upon myself as a woman, and young men began to come to the house, I said to my dear father, 'It's of no use their coming here, Father. My mind has been made up for years, and I shall never change.' He knew at once what I meant. 'I don't blame you, my dear,' he said. 'Of course you are young at present, but he has won you fairly, and if he is at all like what you make him out to be, I could not leave you in better hands. He will be home in another 3 or 4 years, and I shall have the comfort of having you with me until then. But you must not make too sure of it. He may fall in love out there. You know that there is plenty of society in Madras.' I laughed at the idea. All the pretty ones either come out to be married, or get engaged on the voyage, or before they have been there a fortnight. I have no fear, Father, of his falling in love out there, though I don't say he might not when he gets home, for of course he thinks of me only as a little girl." "Well, my dear," he said, "we will get him and his father and mother to come down as soon as he gets home. As you have made up your mind about it, it's only right that you should have the first chance." "It was not to be as he planned, Dick, but you see I have had the first chance, and it's well it was so, for no one can say how matters would have turned out if I had not been on the spot. Do you know, Dick, I felt that when you rescued me from slavery, you became somehow straightway my lord and master. As you carried me that night before you, I said to myself I should always be your little slave, and you see it has come quite true." "Oh, I don't know about that, Annie. We are in England now, and there are no slaves. You will be the mistress now, and I your devoted servant." "It will be as I say, Dick," she said tenderly. "I feel that, to the end of my life, I shall remain your willing slave." There was nothing to prevent an early marriage. It was settled that Captain and Mrs. Holland should retain the house, which indeed they could well afford to do, and that Dick and Annie should reside there whenever they were in town, but that as a rule they would live at the estate of her father, which he had purchased near Plymouth. Their means were ample, for during the 8 years he was in the service, Dick's £12,000 had, as his father had predicted, doubled itself, and Annie's fortune was at least as large as his own. Dick had good reason to bless at the end of his life his mother's plan, that had resulted in the double satisfaction of restoring his father to her, and in winning for himself the woman whom he ever regarded as the dearest and best wife in the world. End of The Tiger of Mysore, by G. A. Henty.